As is probably obvious if you've seen any videos on this channel, I am fascinated by the developmental, beta, and planning stages of Digimon and all of the other franchises I adore. Whether it is the Digimon Frontier partners changing their design throughout the development process, or something as simple as design choices on Omnimon's insignia changing through different projects. But recently I was made aware of a very specific Digimon that had a potential beta name before it was finally decided upon. And so in today's video, yes, I am going to talk about 10 Digimon-ish whose names at one point or the other changed completely. What is up, digital companions? My name is freshly shaved and haircutted Karn EX. Thank you so much for all your kind comments about my natural hair. I won't forget those usernames. And yes, name changes for Digimon. Digimon that were designed to have a different name at one point that eventually became the name we stuck with. And no, I'm not talking about sub versus dub differences. I'm actually talking specifically about Digimon whose names were supposed to be something else in the same language they debuted in. For example, while yes, it is Omegamon in Japan and Omnimon in the West, I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about an instance where a Digimon's name was different at one time or the other in the same language. And actually I will start with Omnimon or Omegamon as an example of this, and the first on our list. Because as I've talked about before, Omnimon went through a lot of design changes, with concept art showing a few different takes on the idea of what Omnimon could have been at the time. There of course is the one that ended up, in my opinion, looking most like what would go on to be Agumon Bond of Courage, or Bravery, but two that had distinct names with this design, which I think looks to me more like an evolution of War Greymon specifically, and the Garurumon elements are lost, known as Master Dramon. I think this would be a really cool Digimon to see, especially because we have like Master Tyrannomon, for example. But another early name and design considered for Omnimon was instead Garuru Greymon, this kind of dinosaur centaur, literally merging the two parts of War Greymon and Metal Garurumon. Garuru Greymon has kind of stuck around as a bit of a joke through to more of the modern day though, as in Digimon Stories Cyber Sleuth, Nokia, who is partnered with an Agumon and a Gabumon that eventually become the Royal Knight Omnimon, refers to them as Garuru Greymon. This obviously just works for Nokia's character because she's like, haha, calling her Digimon Garuru Greymon because they're half Metal Garurumon and half War Greymon, but it also calls back right to the origins of Omegamon or Omnimon, when it very nearly could have been Garuru Greymon. Moving forward then is one that has always disappointed me a little bit. This guy, Luxmon, was kind of created as a Dominimon slash Pidomon pre-evolution, and I've really grown to like him. His name Luxmon comes from lux, meaning light in Latin. However, when we first saw Luxmon at DigimonCon 2023, when the bird and angel themed Bee Memory was revealed, while they did name it as Luxmon and indeed had its evolution, the debuting Archaiangemon, if you look at the actual Bee Memory lineup here that includes Pidomon and Dominimon, that Japanese text is way longer than what should be Luxmon, and that is because it seemed that at one time or the other, a potential name for Luxmon was Pico Angemon, and this is really fascinating. Obviously, it being a Angemon-related Digimon makes sense, as its Digimon reference book listing does refer to it imitating Angemon. Funnily enough, this would make a deeper connection to other Digimon referenced in its Digimon reference book listing, as it is stated that it is the target of Impmon and Demi-Devimon's teasing. And yeah, if you look at it visually, Luxmon very much looks like it could be an angelic version of Impmon, maybe an evolution of Kalumon if Kalumon was considered an in-training, but also the fact that it was originally called Pico Angemon likely would have meant in English it would have been called Demi-Angemon, as Demi-Devimon's Japanese name is Pico Devimon, making Luxmon the literal holy counterpart to Demi-Devimon. I do like the Luxmon name, and I'm not really sure why they decided to change it, but I would have had absolutely no problems with this little guy being Pico Angemon or Demi-Angemon. He's such a cutie little patootie though. He always looks to me like TK cosplaying as Angemon or Pidomon. Alright, next up is one that is really interesting, and that is that Bemon, B-E-M-Mon, the weird alien creature modeled after Tentomon from Digimon World 3, originally had a different name, but not a name that will be unfamiliar to you, because Bemon's original name was Snatchmon. Yes, the name of its evolution. When we look at concept art for Bemon, we can see, yes, that reference to it being similar to Tentomon, the same type as Tentomon, and being given the moniker Snatchmon. It's just a little thing, but I think it's so cool how potentially at this point maybe maybe they didn't even have a champion level designated for Bearmon, and it was only at that point maybe did they start to change names up and give that the name Snatchmon and make this little guy Bug-Eyed Monstermon. I will never call him Vemon, you can't make me. Then is a very different type of name change, not a sub versus dub change, but also not a planning and creation stage name change either, because on the original Digital Monster VPET in American and English speaking territories, there were some interesting name changes made that did not stick for the rest of the franchise. These technically are the first localizations of these names, but the localization element is a little bit unimportant as it still is true that these names changed in the same territory eventually. I was never aware of this. I did not know this, because as a kid I discovered Digimon through the anime primarily, but on the Digital Monster version 1 VPET, Devimon was not called Devimon originally, and Monzemon wasn't called Monzemon. They were called Darkmon and Teddymon. Now this is very interesting because this is basically the only example of this happening for these guys. We don't really see them being referred to as Teddymon or Darkmon in the future. I think the reasons though are fairly obvious, even if not directly stated by anyone at Creative at Bandai. First of all, Devimon's name comes from devil, so that might be perceived to offend religious sensibilities, so instead they make him Darkmon, sure. As for Monzemon, well yeah, Monze is Japanese, coming from the name of the playwright Chikamatsu Monzemon from Bunraku or Puppet Theatre, a reference that kids in the West probably just wouldn't get. What's interesting though is there's a lot of Digimon on the Digital Monster version 1 that did retain Japanese names, so I don't know why they would have specifically chosen Monzemon to get the much more obvious Teddymon moniker, as we had Digimon like Agumon and Koromon, even Numemon on that VPET. This change didn't last long though, as we never saw these names used in the franchise again. When Digimon Adventure aired as Digimon Digital Monsters in America, they were back to being Devimon and Monzemon. It's a weird little outlier in the history of official English Digimon media, where it's not just like a slight spelling change like Ranamon and Lanamon, but wholly different names decided at one point that would then change to kind of weird reasons. I'd love to find out what they really were one day. Okay, then we have what sparked this video, a post by @Rasterdog77 on Twitter, and something that I truly never noticed before, obviously because I don't speak Japanese, but I'd never seen anyone else point out either, and that is that the development name for Ancient Megatheriumon was Ancient Zudomon, and I have never felt more vindicated in my life. I remember making Digimon Frontier related videos and saying how clear it was that the Frontier spirits and these 10 ancient warriors were obviously meant to be piggybacking off the concept of Digimon Adventure, tying back into them in a more obscure way. Well, we have one more ancient warrior who at one point or the other was literally supposed to be an ancient version of an adventure partner evolution. Now let's be clear here, Ancient Megatheriumon and Ancient Zudomon, neither of those names describe what this fella is. He doesn't look like Zudomon or a Megatherium. But it's really cool actually that Digimon Frontier itself seems to be the anime that we have the most prototype and planning stage information on, as it's not just Ancient Zudomon or Ancient Megatheriumon that had a name change during its development. We have concept art for what would have been Bolgmon or Metal Kabuterimon being called Biddy Beamon, and by the way, I love this design. In addition to this, we have Agnimon, who was originally going to be called Ifrimon and have a slightly different design too. As a big fan of Final Fantasy, the idea of an Ifrit Digimon is very cool to me. And even Chakmon had two developmental names, while its design was very different to what we would end up getting, Shirokumon and Polamon. Shirokumon comes from Shiro and Kuma, white bear, which is, literally what Chakmon is. And then Polamon, its other name, of course, comes from polar bear and being polar. However, interestingly, that does set us up for something that happened years later, over 20 years later actually, when we got Polar Bearmon, who many consider to feel like it could be the lost or reconfigured, hybrid, unified, whatever spirit for the Spirits of Ice from Digimon Frontier, as you can kind of see how Chakmon and Korikakumon merged together could become Polar Bearmon rather than the Daipenmon we got. Or at least Polar Bearmon could act as kind of their like Kaiser Greymon, I guess, if you wanted it to, even though its level's not quite right for that. It's interesting that though, when crafting an evolution line using Chakmon as maybe the champion for Polar Bearmon instead of Frigimon, there's a world where it would have been Polamon digivolving to Polar Bearmon. Kind of fun. And finally, our two Digimon that kind of swapped names. At one point, this Digimon, Mimicmon, which is meant to be a reference of course to mimics from the various fantasy games and tabletop RPGs across the years, but also the Cage Digimon Figures toy line, well, its name originally was not Mimicmon, but Rebellymon. Yeah, Rebellimon, as in the name of the new Ogremon evolution, which many of you will have seen in Digimon Adventure 2020. And this is interesting. I guess Mimicmon originally being called Rebellimon is due to its, rebellious nature, a prisoner that's been locked in a cage. But I guess they realized that it did resemble more a mimic. But if we look at the design notes for Rebellimon, what we came to know as Rebellimon, it originally was going to be Metal Ogremon. Yeah, it was that simple. It really truly was the Ogremon equivalent of Metal Greymon. But when they decided that Rebellimon was not a name that fit Mimicmon, or they wanted to just go with the name Mimicmon, instead of keeping Metal Ogremon, they realized that Metal Ogremon, I guess, looked quite rebellious, like a rebellious biker gang, and so they gave it the name Rebellimon. That's such an interesting thing. Two Digimon who look so different, despite debuting on the same range of Digimon Pendulum Z2 toys, Rebellimon and Mimicmon weren't even on the same V-Pet, so there was actually no way to make Mimicmon digivolve into Rebellimon. A connection severed despite being two Digimon with a shared name origin. And that is it. 10 Digimon whose names changed completely at one time or the other in the same territory where they eventually got a different name. Thank you so much for watching, and thank you to my sovereign level patron, ZDK14 over on patreon.com/Karn EX, as well as everyone else who supports me over on Patreon, here on YouTube channel memberships. I am so grateful to you. Big things are coming for Digimon and this channel. So excited to share it with you all when I can. I'll see you next time when we go to Duel. Bye bye.